Welcome to week 10, where we're going to look at the Antichrist, one of Nietzsche's last writings. And we're going to start by looking at a quote from Nietzsche which he wrote about the book. He said, "My life is now reaching its culmination. A couple of years more, and the earth will quake from a great lightning stroke. I swear to you that I have the power to alter the calculation of time. There is nothing in existence today that will not be toppled. I am more dynamite than human being. My revaluation of all values, with the main title, The Antichrist, is finished. In the next 2 years, I have to accomplish having the work translated into 7 languages, the first edition in each language, circa 1 million copies." And this is a letter that he wrote in November of 1888. The Antichrist comes at an interesting point for Nietzsche. It was written in 1888, and Nietzsche wrote extensively during this year. We can actually see that in 1888 we have the case of Wagner that he wrote. He writes Twilight of the Idols in this year. He also writes, of course, Ecce Homo, and just before writing Ecce Homo, he writes The Antichrist. Now, The Antichrist was not published until 1895, and this was because of the controversial content that it had. And it's also worth pointing out that although we might see 1889 as the year that Nietzsche had his breakdown, it actually happened on the 3rd of January 1889. So we can see that all of this writing that he did in 1888 was right at the end of his creative lifetime. And so sadly, this was one of the very last things that he would have written. He intended The Antichrist to be the first volume in a bigger project, which he was going to call The Revaluation of All Values. It wasn't very well received at the time, and it's probably one of his less significant works. It's very much a criticism of Christianity, but it really doesn't add an awful lot that's new to the secular debate, which is why it is perhaps overlooked. But it does raised some very interesting points about Christianity, and I think there's some very valuable points in reading it. The Antichrist then comes towards the end of Nietzsche's writing life, and as Ansel Pearson says here in this quote, "The late period includes a number of classic texts such as Beyond Good and Evil, On the Genealogy of Morality, Twilight of the Idols, The Antichrist, and Ecce Homo. In contrast to the yay-saying task that marks the Free Spirit trilogy, this set of texts is devoted to what Nietzsche called his nay-saying task, involving a revaluation of all values and a fatal reckoning with Christian morality." Now, the title of the Antichrist is interesting, and it's not necessarily what we might automatically assume. So we might think that this is a straightforward reference to the Bible. So we have, of course, the reference from John in the Bible where it says, "Children, it is the last hour. As you have heard that the Antichrist is coming, so now many Antichrists have come. From this we know it is the last hour." So it's possible that this is what Nietzsche is referring to. However, it's also been argued that it is simply meaning one who is a critic of Christianity, someone who denies Christ. So that it should be more considered, a more accurate translation might be the anti-Christian. However, the way Nietzsche uses the word throughout the book actually does suggest that he is quite happy for us to consider the New Testament reference appropriate for our reading here. But it's something to bear in mind. As ever, Nietzsche was interested in language, and he would have been aware of the different ways in which it could be read. The Antichrist, then, is focusing on looking at Nietzsche's views on Christianity. It starts by looking at the issues of modern man and philosophy and arguing that they are sick in some ways, that they have a problem. He claims that Christianity is at the root of this illness, and the Antichrist looks at the history of Christianity and Nietzsche's view of it in terms of how it has become problematic in its interpretations. And the Antichrist is really a sustained critique of Christianity. In these lectures, what we will do is to split the text into two halves. So the first lecture then will look at Nietzsche's issues with modern philosophy and the modern man, and start to look at some of his criticisms of Christianity. And then in the second half, we'll look at his historical ideas about Christianity and how they link into his overall concepts of Christianity.